So our desire to reinvent organizations and to transform organizations is susceptible to these idealizing, abstracting tendencies that particularly people who have been educated a lot are susceptible to, but not just that. It seems they also come, these tendencies also come with a certain kind of anxiety about the challenges that come with lived experience. So one can have conversations inside one's organization that are very concrete about authority, power, and accountability, and the small or apparently small thresholds that have to do with these topics. But of course, the whole nature of the organization is infused into these apparently small steps that can be taken in terms of making organizations a place where people can flourish, and that the impact of what the organization does is also one of human flourishing. And on this point, I've been part of some very compelling conversations where, in relation to the new book, and Everyone Culture by Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy, and particularly these conversations have gone to one of the major cases in that book about the hedge fund and about the CEO of the hedge fund. And the need to also consider the accountability of the organization to the larger social system, even though as one is admiring how the nature of accountability practices has been transformed in such an empowering way within the organization. And how is the impact of these next stage organizations that we are looking to as models, how is their impact, their larger impact, coming into the conversation? The organizations you identified in your book, Reinventing Organizations, are not readily subject to a critique like the one that's arising about the hedge fund case.
Some could. So that was one of the sort of limitations or the boundaries that I chose for my inquiry and the book I've written, which was really looking at the internal management systems. Mm-hmm. Right? So even the part that I write about evolutionary purpose mm-hmm. isn't so much about the purpose that you do outside in the world, mm-hmm. but much more about the management practices inside to listen to the purpose that the organization wants to achieve. Mm-hmm. And so I, for instance, had interesting conversations about, B Corps, this movement that is looking in large part at what the organization is doing outside. And this is in many ways complementary. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to talk provocatively, you could be an arms manufacturer and organize as a teal organization. In some sense, or you can be an organization that does wonderful things in the outside world, but be organized in a very hierarchical manner, in a very soul deadening manner, which you, by the way, see a lot, right? You see a lot of nonprofits or organizations have a really glorious purposes outside, but inside are little microcosms of hell sometimes. And so the interesting question for me is, does one influence the other, and how much does that happen, right? So, once you take, for instance, fear out of the equation to a large extent, when you install self-management and you have conversations that come from a deeper, more authentic place, suddenly people can voice concerns about, what the organization is doing in the outside world, and how do we participate in the larger systems, and the exploitation of, of the planet and our capitalist system and all of that. And so I found it interesting that in some cases I've seen examples of that happening, but I've also seen examples where that hasn't happened or is taking a long time. So, for instance, one of the organizations I write about in the book, the tomato producing company, Morningstar, they're very, they've perfected self-management really to the last degree, but they have a very, very sort of engineering culture. And they participate in an agricultural system that I personally find shocking. And I'm just curious, how long will it take for people there, who no longer, are afraid of a boss, firing them if they speak out. How long will it take for people to speak out there, and ask for other agricultural practices? But it seems like, the weight of the culture is still very strong, and, people there have been recruited and operate in a, in a perspective where, traditional agriculture seems just to be fine with most people. And so that's been an interesting examples. But I fully see sort of the limitations of the work that I've done, which is really to look at the internal management practices, and not question the sort of the broader societal impacts that these organizations have, or to what degree do they still participate in these things.